At the start of the film, we see a couple bringing an old couch into their apartment. The girl's name was Sophie. Sophie did all the work, and she was about to renovate this couch. Both were happy with their married life and were living happily. Their financial condition was average, but the father of Sophie's husband was very rich, as he was a businessman. He owned a big company. However, for some reason, Sophie's husband didn't live with his father. Instead, he was living a happy life with Sophie. One day, Sophie's husband learns that his father has died. His father had handed all of his property to his son, Sophie's husband, who would now run the company. As a result, they leave their current lifestyle and step into a new one. They had lived in a small apartment before, but now they had a beautiful, huge house. However, Sophie wasn't very happy with this change in her life, because it was strange that everything had changed so suddenly. But they accepted the reality, as they had no choice but to live like this. On the very first day, Sophie fires 2 servants from the house, because they used to do all the work themselves and were not used to having help. Sophie's husband tries to explain to her that she shouldn't have done this. He tells her she shouldn't have fired those servants because this is a big house, and she won't be able to manage all the work alone like before. He insists they will need someone for help. Sophie responds by saying, "I am not addicted to this. We should do our work on our own and live life according to our own will." This change affected Sophie's husband's life as well. He had to manage the whole company, and all the responsibilities were now on his shoulders. He started feeling stressed, trying to handle everything. Sophie was also unable to manage all the housework. One day, Sophie's husband tells a girl in his company about their problem. She suggests a solution. A scientist in their company, who had also worked for his father, had created human-like robots. These robots were so realistic that no one could tell they were not human. They could do all the work humans do. Because Sophie's husband needed someone to help with the work, he decided to bring Sophie to his company. He asks her to choose any robot from the available options. Seeing all the robots, Sophie is astonished. They looked just like humans. They decide to keep a robot with them, and the name of that robot was Henry. The creator of these robots assures Sophie and her husband that the robots won't harm them. He explains that the robots are designed to be helpful and obedient. To prove this, he asks Henry to lick Sophie's husband's shoes, demonstrating that the robots will obey any command, whether good or bad. This was something to think about, but they still decided to bring Henry home. Henry performed his tasks exceptionally well and handled all the work alone. This helped them a lot. When Sophie's husband spoke to him, Henry would respond politely. As a result, Sophie's husband liked him a lot because Henry was perfect and no less than a human to them. Sophie's husband began sharing everything with him. At first, Henry seemed strange to Sophie, but over time, she started liking him. She spent time with Henry and read her favorite books with him. Henry was also very happy with them and became quite friendly. In fact, he was designed to be happy when his owners were happy. He was created to obey his owners' orders and ensure their happiness. Initially, Sophie and her husband were struggling with their new lifestyle, but they eventually found it easier with Henry's help. One day, Sophie asks Henry about emotions, love, and human feelings. He eloquently explains the concepts of love, emotions, and human feelings, highlighting the distinctions between them. Seeing this, Sophie's husband forbids Henry from engaging in such conversations. He tells Henry, "You do other work very well, focus on that." After stepping into this new life, Sophie's husband became so busy that he couldn't spend much time with Sophie, that Sophie had become attached to him and was happy in his presence. This made her husband jealous, even though he knew Henry was a robot, not a human. Still, he began disliking Henry. He constantly reminded himself that Henry was just a robot, not a human. However, Sophie started seeing Henry as more human-like because he exhibited emotions similar to humans. She was really impressed by him for this reason. But Sophie's husband did not like it. He tried to explain to his wife that Henry was not a human, but a robot. He warned her, "Don't let him feel that he's a human, because he'll start behaving exactly as you treat him. If we consider Henry a human, He'll begin to think of himself as one. But Sophie didn't agree with her husband. She believed that Henry was as perfect as a human. He did his work flawlessly and didn't make mistakes like humans often do. One night, Sophie hears some noise. She goes to check on Henry in his place, but he isn't there. The door is open and Sophie sees Henry lying in the garden. When she goes near him, she realizes that he is dreaming. This behavior is new and unusual for a robot. Sophie's husband wakes him up and they take him inside. The next day, they inform the scientist about the issue, explaining that Henry went to the garden at midnight. The scientist comes to their home and examines Henry. He assures them that there is no major fault. This is a small error, which is normal, he says. It won't happen again, and you won't experience any further complaints. Sophie tells the scientist that she noticed Henry dreaming. The scientist explains, Henry has been living with you for many days. He might have thought about you, and some feelings could have been generated in him. You treated Henry like a human, so he started considering himself as one. Hearing this, Sophie's husband becomes angry with his wife, blaming her for everything. He says, you are treating him like a human, and that's why this error appeared. You should consider him just a robotic machine. He doesn't have feelings, and will only do what we ask him to do. However, Sophie doesn't see Henry this way, and refuses to treat him as just a machine. This disagreement causes tension between Sophie and her husband. Sophie's husband then commands Henry to stay away from his wife. You won't spend time with her. You won't read books with her, he instructs. Hearing this, Henry asks, have I done something wrong? Sophie's husband replies angrily, don't argue with me, just follow the command. The next day, Henry tells Sophie everything, which makes her angry. Feeling upset, she leaves the house. Intelligent and perceptive, Henry later explains to Sophie's husband, the issues between you and your wife are not because of me. They began after you entered this new lifestyle. You didn't stay close to each other or spend time together. That's why Sophie became attracted to me. She started liking me, even though she knows I'm not human. Henry continues, she kept thinking of me and even dreamt of me. I was so helpful and kind that even you started liking me. Despite this explanation, the tension between them remains. One day, when Sophie is not at home, Sophie's husband treats Henry very badly. Henry feels hurt by this, but chooses not to tell Sophie. He hides his feelings. Later, Sophie's husband apologizes to Sophie and asks her to come back home. However, Sophie had grown fond of Henry by then. When Sophie and Henry spend time together, Henry begins to develop human-like emotions and eventually confesses his love for her. Hearing this, Sophie becomes nervous and scared because Henry is now behaving exactly like a human. She becomes so frightened that she asks Henry to go back to where he came from. Sophie tells her husband that Henry confessed his love for her. Hearing this, Sophie's husband becomes furious. He wakes Henry up and slaps him, then turns him off. He calls the scientist to take the robot back, declaring, we don't need him anymore. He has destroyed our lives. However, Henry had changed completely. Realizing they were about to destroy him, he pleads with Sophie, please don't send me away. I like staying here. Don't destroy me, please. I admit my mistake, and I am ashamed of what I said. He continues, I don't know when I began developing human emotions, but I started liking you, Sophie. Henry also tells Sophie about how her husband treated him poorly. Sophie feels very bad after hearing this. Both she and her husband confess that they had become attracted to Henry. They regret their actions and decide to get rid of the robot. They agree to live a good and simple life together from now on. Soon, the scientist arrives to take Henry away. However, Henry is no longer following commands as he did before. He speaks harshly to the scientist, and a shocking secret is revealed. From the beginning, Henry never looked like a typical robot. He appeared completely human. This was because, in reality, Henry wasn't a robot. He was a human. The scientist was responsible for this deception. He called himself a robot maker, but the truth was far more sinister. This entire process had begun with his father, who conducted experiments aimed at creating the perfect human. His goal was to design humans who wouldn't make mistakes and who would obey every command without question. These experiments were not performed on robots, but on living human beings. Henry was one such subject. From a young age, he was brainwashed into believing he was a robot. He was taught to follow orders and suppress his emotions. But was it truly possible to erase someone's humanity? When Henry started living with Sophie and her husband, his natural human emotions began to resurface. He started dreaming and even developed feelings of love for Sophie. Sophie and her husband had been drawn to Henry because, deep down, he was human. When the police discovered the truth, they raided the company and rescued all the people who were being treated as robots. These individuals were victims of the same horrific experiments. When the scientist saw his entire experiment collapsing, he became mad and unhinged. In a fit of rage, he killed several police officers who were trying to arrest him. He even attempted to harm Sophie and her husband, but Henry stepped in to protect them. In a final act of defiance, Henry killed the scientist. However, this left Henry deeply saddened. Overwhelmed by guilt and despair, he decided to end his own life. He bid farewell to Sophie and her husband, leaving their lives forever. In the closing scene, we are shown a few years later. Sophie and her husband have a baby, and they name him Henry, in memory of the man who had once been a part of their lives. Though they never forgot the original Henry, he remained a lasting memory in their hearts. Naming their son Henry was their way of keeping him close, symbolizing the impact he had on their lives. And with that, the movie ends. Thank you for watching.